Good evening, everyone. I see folks are coming in slowly. Give it another couple minutes. Good evening. Hello. Hi, welcome. All right, we are 5:30. I think we get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 44th April Community Steering Committee meeting. It's a mouthful. Before we get started, let's go over some logistics. I know we've all been using Zoom for quite a while now, but it's always helpful to get a refresher, especially now that we recently transitioned to simultaneous interpretation. So for those who are calling in through their computer tonight, to access your simultaneous interpretation, you will click the interpretation button, which is a globe icon at the bottom of your screen. Click the language you would like to hear, so you have the option of English or Spanish. And please ensure that mute original audio is not selected. That way you can hear folks who attend through their phone. Otherwise, you won't hear them. And of course, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. We'll be monitoring that continuously. As a reminder, everyone must be in a channel, English or Spanish, so you can hear the meeting. I'll now pause to let the Spanish instructions.
Muy buenas tardes a todos. Para poder acceder a la interpretación, yo sé que muchos de ustedes ya han estado aquí y ya conocen cómo poder hacerlo, pero una vez más, por si acaso hay alguien nuevo que se está uniendo, si usted está por computadora, buscará el icono de un mundo que aparece abajo de su pantalla. Luego seleccionará español y los invito a silenciar el audio original. Jem, are you going to go on to the tablet and phone ones?
Yeah, you can go ahead and do it and then I'll do it after.
Sounds good. Y también si usted está por tableta o por teléfono, el proceso es diferente. Seleccionarán los 3 puntos que aparecen en su pantalla. Luego seleccionarán interpretación de lenguajes. Luego seleccionarán español, una vez más silenciar el audio original. Y luego cuando han acabado, arriba en su pantalla hacia la derecha, encontrará un botón que dice listo o done en inglés. Selecciónelo y de esa manera está escuchando en el canal de español. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Amelia. And now I'll give the instructions in English for those who are calling in through tablet. So similarly in your Zoom controls, it'll usually be under the 3 dots where it says more. You can click language interpretation, and then from there you'll select the language you want to hear. So again, English or Spanish. And again, ensure that mute original audio is not selected so you can hear attendees who are calling in through their phone. And as a reminder, please make sure your screen name reflects this naming convention. So if you're a CSC member or a resident, you want to put a CSC and then your first and last name. If you are a CSC member and resident, you'll put an R in front of your full name. This is a very important reminder for folks, especially those who are participating in the stipend program, because it allows us to track attendance properly. For all other participants, please use this naming convention with your first and last name followed by your organization or agency. And if you're joining us from public, please put a P in front of your full name. And just a few reminders for virtual setting etiquette. Please ensure your mic is on mute unless you're speaking or planning to speak. If you're calling in by phone, you will need to press *6 to mute and unmute. If you have a question or comment, please raise your hand on Zoom. And if you're calling in by phone, you'll press *9 to raise your hand and lower your hand. And just as a reminder for residents participating in the stipend program, you would need to stay at least 75% of the meeting to be eligible for a stipend. So our meeting officially started at 5:30. You would need to stay at least until 7 p.m. to be eligible for this month's stipend. I'm going to quickly go over through our group agreements to ensure we all have a productive call tonight. Let's help each other achieve the meeting goals by focusing on solutions, opportunities, and trying to maintain a productive dialogue. We are a large group, so we want to make sure everyone has a chance to participate. So if you tend to talk a lot during the meetings, we ask you to make space for others. And if you tend to stay quiet during the meetings, we welcome you to take up space, share your ideas and questions with the group. Please remember to be civil and respectful. It's always okay to disagree, and this can be done in a respectful manner. As always, we have quite a full agenda today, so let's try to stay on point and on time by keeping your comments brief and to the point. This will again allow space for others to speak. And whenever there is disagreement, please remember to attack the problem, not the person. We want to honor each other's humanity and dignity. We are humans, again, before any roles or positions we hold. And lastly, let's do our best to seek common ground and find opportunities to identify solutions. So to help us engage in a critical conversation needed to move forward with the implementation of AB 617, we continue to use these group agreements you all established before we, as your new facilitators, joined your meetings. However, we'd like to revisit these agreements in the future. Are they the right ones? Are there any agreements missing? Are we still holding true to these agreements? These are some questions we'd like to bring to you to think about and have you bring your ideas to the next time we discuss this. So this is our agenda for the evening. We will start off with a review of the action items. I believe it'll be brief tonight. Then we'll spend a bulk of the time continuing the discussion on stationary sources from January. The stationary sources discussion that began in January. And then after that, we will briefly hear about time-sensitive standing updates. Then we'll close out and do action items. And as usual, we have a full agenda. So as a reminder, you can propose agenda topics at the end of each CSC meeting. You can also propose them during the agenda setting meetings, which always typically happen every third Wednesday. And you can also propose agenda items by emailing or calling the AIR district. So with that said, are there any questions or proposed amendments to this agenda tonight? Okay, I don't see any hands raised or chats. Let me check the chats. I don't see anything. All right. We're going to go a bit off script here tonight. So as most of you know, Earth Day, which is on April 22nd, is just around the corner. And April is a month of celebrating and increasing awareness about climate change and the environmental movement, which you're all a big part of. And we'd like to express gratitude to everyone in the space for taking the time and energy to engage in this work that your community can, that will allow your community to help tackle air pollution and hopefully reduce environmental health impacts. So we thank you for your continued commitment. I know this is a bit off script, but we were inspired by Eric Payne, who's been so great at acknowledging each month's celebration. Thank you, Eric. And in honor of Earth Day and in the spirit of building awareness, we would like to start a practice of land acknowledgements at the beginning of our meetings. So this is a screenshot of territories that California occupies from an interactive map. I can share the link if anyone is interested. And it shows it in indigenous territories throughout the world. Land acknowledgements serve to develop awareness of colonialism in the past and in the present, because many of us will argue that it's still happening. And this is a long overdue practice that we will incorporate moving forward to recognize ancestral territories and to recognize that the First Nations are the traditional and rightful stewards of the land that we occupy. So with that, I will begin with our formal land acknowledgement. So my colleague, Dr. Amy Ramos, and I live in San Diego, which is on unceded territory of the Kumeyaay. The Kumeyaay have been on this land for millennia and were violently dispossessed of their land, first by Spanish colonists and followed by Americans. My colleague, Liz Lev, is joining us from Oregon on unceded territory of the Northern Paiute, the Wasco, and the Warm Springs tribe. And for those residing in Fresno, you are on the traditional homelands of the Yokuts, who were, I can point that here, of the Yokuts, who were the only residents of that area until the mid-1800s when American settlers invaded the land. So the Yokuts actually made the area inhabitable by way of irrigation, which, as we all know, is an invaluable technology that we all still use today. So with that, we honor the land itself. We honor those who have been and those who remain stewards of this land and for generations to come. And I hope this inspires each of us to continue the work to preserving this planet, and especially in an equitable and just way. And to be clear, we are by no means taking over the monthly celebration announcements. We will leave that to you all. We just wanted to take this opportunity to celebrate Earth Month and introduce our new practice of land acknowledgements. So thank you. And with that, I will pass it off to Jess to start us off with welcoming remarks, and then our wonderful co-host, Genevieve.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Jem, for incorporating. This is beyond just the SERP, right? There's so much that overlaps and all of the efforts that you are all involved with. And thank you, Jem, for reminding us of many great things. So appreciate that. I want to welcome you all and thank you all. Much of the presentation that we will share, which is much of the agenda tonight, is really a result of all the robust feedback we heard in January. So I just want to thank you all for the constant engagement, the constant feedback. And then, as you, I'm sure will all agree, thank and warmly welcome back Genevieve as our co-host. She did a great job representing the community and helping us prepare for tonight's meeting. And we look forward to her being a really robust part of the discussion tonight. So with that, I will pass it to Genevieve.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining. I don't want to take up much time here because I know we have a lot to chat about, but I'm coming to this meeting a little tired, a little exhausted. And I'm sure most people on this line are coming to this meeting after a long day. So I just want to thank you all for joining, for taking this usually personal time to talk about this. And yeah, and while we're also acknowledging holidays, happy Passover, that's coming up on Friday. And pass it back over to the Air District, I think, to continue on the agenda.
Yep. Yes, thank you, Genevieve. So really quickly, we'll go with over the action item tracker, and then we'll move on to the bulk of the agenda tonight for the discussion. So two processes that we've learned that are vital to the success of AB 617 are transparency and accountability. So to help develop those, our team proposed the use of an action item tracker, and the Air District has taken this seriously and is continuously updating it to ensure your voices are heard and that progress is being made toward implementing your suggestions. So as a reminder, at the end of every meeting, we share action items back to the group to confirm that they were correct and accurate. And we encourage any members to add any action items that should be tracked. So I will hand it off to Steph to walk us through the action items updates. And if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or drop them in the chat. Steph?
Thanks so much, Jem, and good evening, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and navigate to the action items from our community profile page. So they're located here in this corner. And I'll go over, just for the sake of time, some of the most recent changes that have happened recently. So again, this top part is broken up by items that are still in progress, and then I'll move on to some of the ones that have been completed. One of the first ones that is in progress here is the Air District will connect with school districts within the South Central Fresno's CSC boundary to clarify the status of current air filtration system and outreach to families. So the Air District has begun this outreach to school district officials and will plan to bring an update to the May CSC meeting. This next item that's still in progress, the CSC will complete the participatory budgeting survey that we're working towards for our next upcoming meeting in May. And so Harder & Company is working with our co-hosts to develop the survey to guide the budget discussion again during this May CSC meeting, and we will send it out once it becomes available. Another item, the Air District will provide CSC information regarding salaries for various positions and other budgeting sources ahead of the May budget discussion, excuse this. And again, the Air District is working to create a participatory budget presentation and exercise based on CSC feedback, co-host input, and then also, of course, with our facilitation team. We do have a handful of items that are still in progress from a couple of meetings back, one of those being regarding analyzing and kind of the lab results of the vitro architectural glass pile inspection. Additionally, also regarding the truck reroute study that our city officials hope to bring to the next city council meeting. And then I'll move on to some of the completed items that happened recently. One of those was that the Air District did release the AB 617 mini grant application draft to the group for feedback. So if you have feedback on that, please feel free to send it our way. The hope is to get this actual application out to the community later in April. And then these next couple of items, I won't go through all of them because they're all related to tonight, actually. A couple of the items that we've had in the past is regarding this, the stationary source presentation that was given in May, and just providing lots of additional information to it. So including, information on sensitive receptors and all that good stuff that we'll actually hear tonight. So are there any questions about the action items? All right, well, thanks. If you think of something, feel free to pop it in the chat, but I'll go ahead and pass it back to Jem.
Awesome. Thank you, Steph. I don't see any hands raised or chat, so we'll move along to the next piece. So I'm actually going to hand it off to our co-host Genevieve to lead us through this discussion, and I'll be here in support. Genevieve, take it away.
Sure. I hope I'm not supposed to share the presentation. Okay, good.
Genevieve, let me go ahead and share it. Let me get it started here. Okay, go ahead.
Great, thank you. So as just said, we've been making updates to this stationary source presentation in response to the comments that we got at the last meeting on this subject. And one of those is we wanted to include those from the facilities that we're discussing in the discussion. So I did want to share there's various individuals representing the facilities that are present at this meeting right now. I don't want to put them on the but please, if you're representing a facility, jump in during that conversation, introduce yourself, and we're really happy to have you. And then other updates that were made to this presentation are a conversation on public health and a mapping exercise of where the sensitive receptors are near the stationary sources. Looking at the emissions over time. Before we had a snapshot in time, and we really expanded on that to show emissions over time and actually turn that into a bar graph so you can visualize it. And we also put the emissions in context. So we put the emissions of a facility in context with the overall emissions inventory for the community, the 617 community. So we know how big a role they play in our inventory. We'll also have a short conversation about cumulative impacts, which I think could be a whole meeting. And also we did the history of violations for the facility. There may be things that we missed or, things that you want updated on based on the last meeting. So please jump in. I think we'll have another really great conversation about all of these facilities. And we were thinking that as we go through each facility, that if you have a clarifying question, so like a burning question about understanding that information in the moment, please raise your hand and ask it. But we do want to hold discussion questions for the end of each facility so we can get through all the data, have it all, and then have conversation. So I hope that works for everyone. And I will pass it. And I'm sorry if I spoke too fast. I just realized I likely did that. but I will pass it to John to jump in. We are kind of starting from square one again, just because we added information back in. So we are going back into vitro, but hopefully we can make it through to some other facilities. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Genevieve. Yeah, just to kind of recap what Genevieve was saying, we reviewed a lot of this information a few months ago in January. Happy to be back and go through this again and hopefully get into some more discussion with some of the other stationary sources and get some good feedback and an overall discussion on status and any questions you might have. So just as a quick overview, when we went over this last time, looking over the different SERP commitments within the South Central Fresno SERP for stationary sources. We list them here in this slide. I can just review those quickly here. IS1 were incentives to reduce chrome plating emissions. So we have a bit of an update there for you. IS4, enhanced inspection frequency of sources with emissions violations. We'll present some of that information in this presentation. IS7, evaluation of best available retrofit control technology requirements. IS8, evaluation of rules beyond FARC, and IS9, expedited facility risk assessment under Air Toxics Hotspot Information and Assessment Act, or AB 2588. Just a little bit of more background here on the different types of pollutants that are addressed through our SERP commitments for stationary sources. NOx emissions, this is important for the formation of both ozone and PM 2.5, so getting NOx reductions is really key to reduce both ozone and PM 2.5 concentrations. NOx emissions can come from combustion of fuel, mobile sources, or industrial sources. Directly emitted PM 2.5 can come from the cooking of different types of food, from burning wood, road dust, or other industrial sources. And then SOx emissions are also a precursor to the formation of PM 2.5. This can come from the burning of fossil fuels. And then VOCs, volatile organic compounds, are important for the formation of ozone. This can come from cleaning and surface coatings, architectural coatings, and industrial sources. And then air toxics, which can be hundreds of different types of air toxics, from diesel particulate matter, from combustion of diesel fuel, primarily from heavy-duty trucks, to different types of BTEX VOCs, which come from oil and refining and petroleum products, to many other things that can be addressed through this process. So I'm going to hand it to Genevieve. Did you want to talk a bit about the map here and then the following slide on the CalEnviro results, if you wanted to give this overview? Please go ahead.
Sure. I think this is the same map that we showed before to help understand where the different facilities are. As you can see, that's the 99 and the railroad that's running diagonal. And then we have Malaga there near Vitro and Rio Bravo, and then the community above, Penny Newman, Calwa. I'm sure we all know the geography of our community. And we did have a question in here last time if there was a source not listed that you wanted to discuss, and we did want to pose that again if there were any additional facilities of concern.
Hi, it's Lisa. Sorry, I should have raised my hand.
Hi, Lisa.
I'm kind of interested in what in my area up by the tower, Producers Dairy might be putting out, because we've had people from the neighborhoods talk about smells and odors that are coming from them. And even though they're doing production of dairy, and ice cream and yogurt and all sorts of stuff there, I'm just kind of curious about what's in the air out there. I know it's not as bad as southwest, southeast, but it should be something that needs to be looked at temporarily. And if nothing's found, that's fine.
Awesome. John, can we commit to including that in our analysis and potentially bringing it back to the committee at a later date?
Yep, thank you, Genevieve. Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, I made a note of that. We can maybe collect some similar information to what we have here for some of these other facilities and bring that back to the group. Yeah.
Cool. Anyone else? I think I see a Denise.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just curious. I don't see anything like Mid Valley located on Elm Avenue in Southwest Fresno. And I'm just wondering if those fall into that area and if they can be added. So Mid Valley disposal.
Is that
Mid-Valley
disposal?
distributors,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
And I can pull up a different list of additional facilities that are located on Elm, but I'm just noticing that there don't seem to be any that are specifically located on Elm that currently exist. So.
Okay. Thank you, Venice. I got that.
Venice, do you have a list of facilities on Elm that you're concerned about? Do you want to list them off
I
now?
would just,
or
I think the Mid Valley would be the
Number
top
one.
priority, and that's a best place to start. So that would
Okay.
be,
Awesome. Thanks, Venice.
thank you.
Anyone else? Scrolling. Okay. Well, that question stands if anyone wants to bring it up later during this discussion. There was a question about community health and understanding these
Genevieve,
are located. So, yes.
Jen, sorry to interrupt. You're cutting out for us. Maybe,
Oh.
Yeah. I don't know if maybe it'll help to either turn off the camera if you want to call in.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop my video and move closer to my router.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So what I was saying is at our last discussion that we wanted to talk more about community health, understand the health metrics for the community that these facilities are located in. And kind of the first step for that analysis, we went to CalEnviroscreen, which I'm sure a lot of you know about, which is a tool used to identify census tracts across the state and understand both the level of pollution exposure. So when it comes to ozone, particulate matter, diesel, and also understand how sensitive a how sensitive a community is to the pollution. So looking at health metrics like asthma, low birth weight, and also socioeconomic factors. And so the three facilities that we're talking about first are all located in the same census tract. As you can see, it's outlined on the left. And this is on the right, the metrics for that community. And I will give everyone a second to look that over. The Spanish speakers have it in Spanish, correct?
Correct.
Okay, awesome. So as you can see, this census tract is given an overall score of 99%, which means it ranks in the top percentile for overburdened communities. So, I mean, this is why 617 is here. And this is why Fresno was picked in the first year of the program to try to focus on reducing the burdens here for our communities. And I'll talk a little bit. There's also, actually, I'll stop here and ask if there's any questions or comments on this. Okay. So in response to our last conversation, we wanted to see these community health metrics and also see where the facilities are. We also wanted to talk about cumulative impacts. And so in layman's terms, that is, what's the impact of not just one source of pollution on the community, but if you have multiple sources, what is going to be the cumulative or the additive impact? And I must admit that that is a kind of new realm of analysis for the agencies. We actually don't have good tools to understand cumulative impacts yet. What the agencies do have are health risk assessments, which focus on one facility at a time, and understanding the impacts to the health of the community around a facility. And so we're in the process of pulling those health risk assessments for these facilities, and then not only pulling those and understanding them, but reporting back to the committee and explaining it, because it's a lot of technical jargon. So I know that CARB and the Air District are working together to pull those. And I will also give John a moment to speak to that if he'd like to. Yeah.
Before I pivot, we have a hand up.
Yeah, I just noticed. Lily from OEHA. Would you like to comment?
Hi. Yeah, I appreciate the complexity that you're trying to explain in layman's terms. And in this regard, I wasn't actually prepared to say anything, but when you piqued my interest by saying cumulative impacts, that is something OEHA is looking to work on. It's actually more encompassing than that. It takes these chemical risk assessments, as you alluded to, and it actually tries to take the totality of the lived experience. So even non-chemical stressors that we haven't begun yet as an agency to really try to incorporate all the things. And so with that, we also need to fit within a framework of, federal definitions of cumulative impact. So it is a work in progress, very early stages, but I thought that having a slightly better understanding that it is the totality of everything, the lived experience, chemical, non-chemical, as well as these indicators as shown by CalEnviroscreen. It is a good screening tool for seeing the multiple impacts of all the things. I'm sorry, I have no better word than there's a lot of things. So the definitions that everyone needs to work from needs to be a common one. And I thought it was worth uplifting that working on the definition to get to a common goal is, I think, helpful for making sure all the different factors, things are addressed. And I thought that might be helpful.
Yeah, thanks so much. Ed, you also have your hand raised?
Yeah, this is a tremendous amount of information, and I look at the contrast on the community health, and I'm trying to understand. We show drinking water at 100, we show solid waste at 100, and then we show traffic, which we already know is a huge addition to PM and other types of pollution along the 99 corridor. What makes drinking water 100 and solid waste 100 and traffic 25? I just need to. I'm not catching all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate the information. I just don't understand it all.
Yeah, Ed, that kind of baffles me as well, seeing traffic at 25. Does anyone from the agencies want to explain or help us understand?
I know it's a tool that's a state tool, but I can just mention, I think this kind of factors into maybe another, it sounds like we have a few other types of facilities to update on. And I wonder if bringing back maybe a little breakdown of the CalEnviroscreen tool, other indicators besides the ones we always mention, which are mostly air quality and kind of socioeconomic related. Because it's kind of a variety of different things that go into each one. And there's actually I'll link it I'll drop it in the chat right now. There's actually sort of a key for each one of these indicators that's on the CalEnviroscreen site. So, you can dig into it, but kind of to everyone's theme, it's a lot to dig into. And maybe we can work with our partners at OEHA and CARB to kind of simplify and understand kind of at least some of these other metrics, especially the ones that we look at and we think that seems a little bit off to us.
Right. Great. Yeah, I remember looking at the diesel particulate matter one and thinking that it wasn't a great indicator. And I actually looked it up. And so these tools are only as good as the data they rely on. And some of the metrics rely and really great up-to-date information. Some of the metrics don't. So like the diesel PM I saw was based on a 1-day study of emissions, I think on a Saturday or something like that. I don't quote me on it. I looked that up a couple of years ago, but I remember that metric not being great. So some of these metrics may need to be updated, and I do believe that they're in the process of updating the Cal Enviro Screen tool, coming out with the 4th or 5th edition. So hopefully some of that can be addressed, but I added it to our list to look into. Any other questions, comments? And thanks again, Lily, for your comments. The last thing I will say is CARB has usually done these single facility analyses when it comes to permitting facilities. And they are currently in the process on how to reimagine health risk assessments to address cumulative impacts and how that can be used to guide regulatory development. And I believe there's an upcoming meeting on it, which I should have prepped already, but I can put it in the chat when John takes the lead. And so, but that is kind of a long range process and there's no timelines with it. So I would encourage everyone who's interested to get involved in that process. And yeah, I think that's all I have to share here. Anyone else want to jump in? Denise.
Yeah, I really want to thank you for including this. I just feel compelled to say that part of really talking about cumulative health impacts and wanting to have a full picture of stationary sites is for us to be able to see what's currently already there and to understand that even if there's just a usual looking for a single entity and a single stationary source, you're not able to separate that out from what is currently existing there. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about, the asthma rate being at 93 in this as a sensitive population, we can really look at these, the exposures, the environmental effects. We can look at why, even if the diesel particulate matter is undercounted, we still know that there are multiple sites. And just recognizing and acknowledging that there are multiple sites and that there are communities that are already overburdened. And that's really been the point, is that overburdened communities are going to suffer greater health impacts. And we have the ability to document what those stationary sources are, and we can also look further. And so really helping officials to recognize this as important information that should be guiding the way that we decide where we're placing different sites, as opposed to overloading communities, looking for other places where there will not be this cumulative effect because there aren't any in that particular location.
Thank you so much, Denise. I want us to just think about that for a second longer. Yeah, really important to start all these conversations this way, especially when it comes to permitting. Okay, do we want to move on?
That sounds great. Yeah, thank you, Genevieve.
And Venice, is your hand still raised or is that a remnant? Okay.
Thanks.
All right.
All right, great. Thank you, Genevieve. And thanks for all the comments so far. So I'll go ahead and go to the next slide here. And we talked about vitro architectural glass a few months ago in January, had a good discussion, lots of questions. I did want to note here too that we have some people from our permits team and our compliance team here as well who can hear the discussion. They can help answer questions if you have any thoughts or questions on emissions information, different enforcement activities. So we got a good team here to hear the discussion and help provide some more information if you need it. But just a little bit of background here on this facility, vitro architectural glass. It's near the southwest corner of Peach and North. We show up on the map here in the middle, kind of a general area where it's located. And then just to the right of there, we show another map showing Malaga Elementary School, about the distance away, about 0.9 miles away from Vitro Glass. This is a glass manufacturing plant that focuses on flat glass used in windows and other applications. So this is one of the pieces of information that was asked for last time we talked about it, thinking about the emissions from this facility in relation to the emissions as a whole within the South Central Fresno AB 617 community boundary. So that's what we have here. We're showing the emissions for NOx, VOC, and PM 2.5. So if you start on the left-hand side here, you can see that the emissions for Vitro Glass for NOx is that green color in that first pie chart there. And then you can see how that compares against the rest of the different types of sources of NOx within South Central Fresno. So Vitro Glass NOx is about 13% of the total that we see across the entire community. Then going to the right, you see that for VOC emissions, Vitro Glass is about 3% of the community total. And then for PM 2.5, Vitro Glass is about 6% of the community total that we see within South Central Fresno. And then looking at this over time as well, this is one of the other comments, just thinking about, instead of looking at just the last year of emissions, how has this changed over time? Have things gone down over time? What progress have we seen? And so what we're showing here for this facility is NOx, VOC, and PM 2.5 over time. We're on the left-hand side of the table, and on the chart below, the first year is the year 2010. And then we go forward in time to 2016, 2017, 2018, and then most recently in 2019 and 2020. And you can see that below in the line chart, NOx is the blue line there. And you can see that those emissions have been reduced pretty significantly over the past 10 to 12 years, or 10 years over this time period. And you can see the trend of VOC and PM 2.5 emissions as well. Going to the next slide here. Looking at the SERP commitments that we had that's related to this, ISA is the evaluation of rules, including glass melting furnaces for additional emissions reduction benefits. And we actually did amend this rule in December of last year, December 2021. We made amendments to our rule 4354 for glass melting furnaces. This rule, the rule requirements first began in 1994. And it's been amended a number of times, 6 times, and NOx emissions have already been reduced by over 75% before we did this latest rule amendment a few months ago. And in this amendment from December 2021, we lowered limits for even further for NOx, PM, and SOx that resulted in further reductions of the remaining emissions by another 43%, another 49%, and another 4% of where we're at right now for SOx and for PM. And emissions from Vitro Glass will be reduced through these amendments, with them having to put on more controls over time. We had public meetings and workshops through this rule process, and we kept the steering committees informed as we went through this last year. Now, looking specifically at some of the inspections that have happened over the past 3 years. So the CERT measure IS4 says that the facility is subject to enhanced inspection frequency due to having an emissions violation within the last 3 years. So we included some details here on this slide on what those violations were. I'll just read them briefly here. In April of 2019, there was an NOV issued where there was an exceedance of the maximum differential pressure on a dust collector serving the train shed. In June of 2019, a failure of the dust collector serving the sand scale in the basement. In August 2019, leaking soda ash in the underground receiving pit and leaking material discharged from mixer level dust collector. August 2019, receiving sand while the train shed dust collector was not operating, and insufficient dust control in the batch house basement. And then April of 2021, unloading material while dust collector was not operating and insufficient dust control in the batch house basement. And so because of that, they are now subject to enhanced inspection frequency because of these violations. So I'll go ahead and stop there. That was a summary for Vitro Glass. So more information than what we talked about last time. So we can just stop there and see if the group has any questions or comments.
Straight to 9, thank you, John.
And can you mention what is the regularity in which you are doing the inspections now? And what was it before the 8617 SERP strategy?
I think, do we have Jason on from the compliance team?
Yeah, I can address that. So prior to the implementation of the SERP measure, Vitro was on about an annual inspection frequency. And now that frequency has been increased to twice a year.
Is that for Vitro only or for all the facilities within the AB 617?
Yeah, so under that CERT measure, all permitted facilities within the 617 community that have a emissions violation within the last 3 years get put on that 6-month inspection frequency until they've gone, 4 consecutive inspections without a violation.
Thank you.
Lisa.
Yeah, when you're talking about this facility and looking at the numbers, my big one question is you're comparing that one facility to a bigger area. How big of an area are you comparing it to? And is there a problem in comparing it to a bigger footprint because of terrain and distance, since it's surrounded by fields and such? And also to since their glass isn't warehoused and it's out in that back parking lot last time I was out there, and we had winds the other day, or when was the winds? Yesterday?
2 days ago.
Yeah.
All week.
All week, and still coming up with all these winds. You're going to have all that particulate matter of their raw resources going in the air. Can someone go out in the next week or so when the winds start kicking up and, set up some equipment and capture what's really going on out there?
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad, Genevieve, if it's okay, I can step in and help answer that. I'm glad what Lisa just brought up is reflective of one of those action items that Stephanie went over. That is something where we've already started the process in, and we're going to start, analyzing samples here, not only from the site, but also around the site. So to your point, areas that places could be, if there is something blowing off, like if they deposit somewhere, we've started collecting other locations, like samples, so we can do that analysis and understand if there is something happening. But to your point, also taking advantage, right, unfortunately, of the winds and seeing, okay, well, during this particular time, if this is a time when that would be increasing the likelihood something could blow off, let's take a look at that. So it's something we're definitely working on and committed to. And then you mentioned, if I can answer your earlier question, that comparison is to the whole community boundary, just as a reference to all of the discussion we've been having. But I do hear your point. It wasn't necessarily to reflect on what's happening like locally, but just to give context for all of the emissions we've been talking about in the space so far.
Exactly. Yeah, it was just so instead of giving you a number of how many tons, which to me, I don't really know how to comprehend. I was trying to figure out a way to contextualize it. And I understand that if you put one facility in the emissions from a whole community, it's going to be smaller. You would think it wouldn't show up. So yeah, I understand the flip of that, Lisa, and it's a really good point. And I also see Naimeen's hand is raised, and I have a feeling of what
One
she's
last,
gonna say.
excuse me, one last thing real
Mhm.
quick. So is there a commitment by the agency to go out there and measure in the upcoming winds in the next 4 or 5 days? I know it's Easter weekend and all, but to put some equipment out there to take advantage of the upcoming weather?
I'll have to check with folks, but there's definitely a commitment to continue to do that analysis. So now taking that into account and knowing that there's upcoming winds, we can check with our team. We have the capabilities. You all know that we have that van, and that's part of the reason we have that van, right? Is to do these these types of projects. So maybe that could be just knowing that you're totally right in the timing, that makes sense. So we'll talk with the team, and there's a few days before Easter, so we've got some time.
And you already did collect samples?
And that's my question.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
we did already.
you said, and I have been asking even the inspector that attends our IBAN meetings, and he didn't have information or an update on that. I do want to say that we went, I drove by 2-3 weeks ago, and the piles had decreased in size significantly. So they're maybe a fourth smaller than what they used to be when we did the tour with the CART board members, but still they're there and they're still uncovered. So I still would like to know what has been the results of your analysis, and if at some point there's going to be a request to the facility to cover the piles or do something to mitigate how much of that dust goes into the neighboring homes.
Yep. We've done the analysis or done the collection. We just haven't completed the analysis. It's a laboratory analysis, so it gets sent off to a third party. It's not us that does it. So to Naimeen's point, and that's why we kept it on the action item, so that we can keep coming back to you all and let you know what the follow-up is once we do get that kind of complete analysis.
Okay, I see Venice's hand is raised, and then Eric from Vitro also, there it is, also raised his hand. So maybe Venice and then Eric.
Yeah, I'm curious if we have taken any measurements at the school. And if so, what do those look like for those days that we have identified the violations, but also in comparison to other days? And what do we think that exposure is doing to the youth at that particular site?
Yeah, thanks, Vinny's great question. And yes, we are taking measurements at Malaga Elementary School. We have a lot of data we've been collecting there over the past couple of years. So that's a great point. We could compare that data versus some of these violation days and see if we notice anything on the monitoring at the school. That would be a really good next step.
Yeah, I'm also curious if there were any notices to parents about the exposure and the fact that asthma rate is so high, and how this might have impacted the asthma or asthmatic attacks on those days for those children.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know that that's happened. So that's a good question, and maybe something to continue to keep in mind and part of our continual outreach with schools. And I know a lot of you have been kind of on our other subcommittees that talks a lot about this. So that can maybe just be an item. And I will say we have been collecting speciated samples, and nothing so far in analyzing those samples at Malaga. We haven't noticed, and we've been publishing those, and we'll bring our next one. We could bring it to the meeting to have another discussion. We haven't noticed anything that points to any of this, but also to some earlier points, it's perhaps episode based, right? Like if we're talking about glass blowing, it's maybe based on wind, and maybe we can make sure that we line those up with any particular events. That's a good point.
Eric?
Thank you. So I'm the environmental manager over at Vitro Glass. I just wanted to comment, there's talk about the cullet piles, the glass piles. That's something we're working to keep reducing, that pile that's out front by the road, and something we hope to basically remove and eliminate that pile over time. So it is something that, our facility is currently working on.
Thanks so much, Eric. Quick question, follow up on that. Is that a pile though that's part of the operations? Like, are you trying to eliminate it completely, or will there always be kind of incoming glass to add to that pile?
So there's one pile, which I assume is everybody's talking about, was the big pile closest to the road. The glass, that glass is called cullet, crushed glass, is integral to part of our process. We mix back, I think 20% of our raw material is that, ground glass. We still have smaller piles located further back on the facility, but the goal is to try to get rid of that larger pile that's up front.
Can I ask? Yeah, I have a question. Eric, thank you. Definitely, as I said, I have noticed that the piles have decreased in size. In the meantime, will you completely take them or put them in another place closer to your building or whatever? Is there a way for it to be tarped or covered to minimize how much of that really it's, you know, sprays with the wind to the houses next to you?
At this point, no, I don't think it's feasible. That's too large of an area, and you're asking way too much money for us to spend probably tens or hundreds of $1,000s on tarps to cover that at this point. We're continuing to remove that pile and work that back into our raw material feed. So again, we will be continuing to work on that.
Eric, do you have a timeline perhaps of when you plan to eliminate that pile?
I don't. I've only been working here for 3 months, so I'm still trying to dig into some of these things. I mean, I'm sure if everybody's paid attention lately, the pile was whittled down and they just pushed another pile up about 2 weeks ago, but they're trying to break that up. So like I said, we're just going to continue at it, and there is no set time frame. It's just a matter of how much we can mix back into our system on a daily basis, and that varies depending on how much new broken glass we bring out that we have to also reuse.
Okay, well, to be frank, I'm not sure if that's good enough for the community. This has been an ongoing problem. And first, we really appreciate that you are here today and joining us, and we do appreciate that. But I think this is something we're going to need to discuss, especially when it comes to the timelines or the tarping. But we'll also have more information when the analysis comes back from the lab. So perhaps we can keep this on our agenda. But I would love the input from others on the call before we're to move on.
Can appreciate that. It sounds like they're trying to recycle maybe one of their byproducts, and so it is encouraging to hear that it's not getting diverted to landfills or anything of that nature.
There's a question from Larry. Why not enclose this scrap glass inside a structure?
Right point.
I can't answer that again because I'm still relatively new at this facility. I don't know what our long-term goals or plans are. Again, just like anything else, a structure costs a very significant amount of money to put up a structure to handle something like that. But I don't know what our long-term goals are, if that's part of our long-term strategy or not.
Lisa, then Naemin.
Yes, I just had a comment actually to the gentleman that's representing the business. First off, thank you for coming and having this conversation with us. I think it's been much needed, and I appreciate your input and your viewpoint. But I also want you to think about this. There's a home very close to there, and I always think about a mom making an apple pie and opening up their windows because the kitchen's too warm, and there's a nice, lovely breeze. And whatever you have sitting there is blowing in the wind onto that apple pie where people are ingesting it. So I would like to remind you, what is the value and the cost of a life? I would hope that you would go back to the owners, because I do understand you're new at this job, and remind them that they also have a civil obligation to the community and the people that live around that facility. I personally believe that all your raw materials should be inside of a structure. They shouldn't be able to be floating in the air. That's just my opinion. And once again, I want to thank you for your time and your willingness to listen to our group. Thank you.
Yeah, I won't take much time on this item again, but I will want to echo Lisa's comment. Eric, you're new, but this is not new to that community. I administrate a reporting network that has been operating since 2013, and this has been a complaint of the neighbors that their facility has for years. And we have been knocking at every single door that could potentially can ask the facility to do something about it. You know, and it's not, you know, I know you don't have the authority and all that, but if you can convey the message to whomever runs this facility that, you know, if it's a cost of doing business, well, you know, if the air district comes back and says that this material falls within their bulk material, guess what? They're going to have to do it. So it's better for the facility to be a good neighbor and do it now without having to be forced to do it, because, you know, that's part of the new reality. Being a good neighbor to the community where you are located. So again, I understand this is beyond your pay rate, but if you can kindly convey that message, I'm not going to say about for the entire committee, but at least for myself. I'm Nayamin Martinez, and I have been dealing with this issue for many years, and I am very concerned about it.
I will relay the conversations we had here tonight, you know, up the chain, so they're aware of the concerns and what was discussed here today. So.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Are we comfortable moving on to the next subject? I have a head nod. I'll give it back to you, John.
All right, thank you, Genevieve. So let me advance this here. Okay, next facility we wanted to bring some information to you all on is the Rio Bravo Facility. This is near the southeast corner of Willow and North. Again, similar area to Vitro in the same area. On the right-hand side, you can see another map there showing Malaga Elementary School. Again, about 0.9 miles away from this facility. This is a biomass facility. So as opposed to open burning, this operation burns woody waste in a controlled process to generate electricity. That's the focus of this facility. So again, just like with the last facility, this is showing the emissions from Rio Bravo for NOx, VOC, and PM 2.5 versus the total that we have within the AB 617 community. So on the left-hand side are the NOx emissions. So Rio Bravo is about 4% of the total NOx across the whole South Central Fresno community. 0% for VOC compared to the total, and for PM 2.5, it's about 8% of the total PM 2.5 across South Central Fresno. Then looking at the emissions over time here, similar to what we saw for the previous facility, you can see the trend in NOx, VOC, and PM 2.5 from 2010 through 2020 during this period. And just going forward to the next slide here, similar to the last one, IS8 evaluation of rules applied to this facility as well. And the action that we took was we recently amended Rule 4352, which was our solid fuel-fired boiler, steam generator, and process heater rule. We amended this in December of last year, a few months ago. This rule, the rule requirements began in 1994. It's been amended 3 times before this latest rule amendment. And through different actions over time, NOx emissions had already been reduced by about 75%. And through the recent amendments that we had a few months ago in December, we amended the rule to lower the NOx limits, establish PM and SOx limits for the first time, and this will result in further reductions of another 15% of NOx, 28% of PM, and 52% of SOx. And emissions from this facility, Rio Bravo, will be reduced through these amendments, and this public process occurred last year through 2021. We had meetings and workshops, and the steering committees throughout the valley were kept up to date when these meetings were happening. And then looking at the enhanced inspection frequency, this is not in effect for this facility because no emissions violations have been documented at the facility since the SERP was established. And because of that, since the adoption of that SERP in 2020, there have not been any violations, so it's not on an enhanced inspection frequency schedule. And I'll go ahead and stop there and see if there are any comments or discussion on this facility.
I have one clarifying comment, and then I want to pass it to the committee. I see that the rules have been updated. Do we know when those will go into effect and when the actual emission reductions will occur? And what are the changes that are going to come about because of the rule change, like mechanically?
Yeah, so for this rule, for the rule I mentioned that applies to Rio Bravo, the new emission limits go into effect in the year 2024. So the facility will have a year to 2 years to work with their current control system to make sure they're meeting those new rule limits. And then similar for the glass melting rule, that one is like a two-stage rule where the initial lower emission limits go into effect in 2024, and then and the next time that they end up working and redoing their furnace, they'll have to go even lower to lower emission limits. And the reason that one is a two-step process is because it's really difficult to make large changes to a glass melting furnace while it's still under what's called a campaign. That really needs to happen when the furnace is completely rebuilt. And so the way it's set up is by 2024, working with the current control systems, they need to make adjustments and lower those emission limits. And then the next time that they actually rebuild their furnace, after that point, that's when they'll have to put in the more significant emissions controls to get more emissions reductions at the next furnace rebuild. And Eric has his hand up, so in a minute he can give us more technical details of what that process would be like.
Okay, I have more questions, but I want to pass it to Nayamin and others.
Yeah, I remember when you guys were developing that like tri-dimensional map where you could see like cylinders, like the facilities that were larger emitters. I remember that both Glass and Rio Bravo were the top polluters, if I'm wrong for PM 2.5, but comparing the data since you developed that initial image until now, has anything changed? Has that decreased or is the same, or what's the status of that?
Are you referring to, was that the CARB online tool, looking at the emissions from different facilities?
It was our map, John. John, can you go back to the one before? Because the only things that have changed, the slide before, or a couple slides where it has the timeline and the chart, just to kind of give some context to Nayamin's. So, so one of the things that in comparison, and we're actually working on updating that map, Nayamin, the 3D option was only comparing stationary sources versus stationary sources. So to your point, among stationary sources, it is a higher source in those early years, so 17, 18, 19, compared to other stationary sources. But compared to the overall inventory, if you go back one more slide, John, compared to the overall inventory, although it's 8%, you can see the rest of the stationary sources is that light blue on that PM 2.5, meaning you can see it's up most of the, or not most, but it's a good chunk of that light blue stationary source sliver. But compared to the whole inventory, it's much lower. We are working on updating those maps so it makes more sense comparing everything on the inventory, because to your point, it does, the scale is a little bit off, and we're going to make it more reflective, similar to how we have our Arvin map, which is our latest map.
Thanks. I want to pass it to Eric, but just for context, Rio Bravo and the PM 2.5 emissions, it is the largest stationary source of PM 2.5 in Fresno, Madera, and Tulare County. So in the Tri-County area, or the Central California really area, it is the largest emitter of PM 2.5. So if that helps put it into context. Eric, your hand's raised.
Yeah, I just had a comment regarding, how the the furnace, how our furnace runs. So we're, I think, starting year 7 on our furnace run, and they generally run roughly 15 years. So we've probably got 7 or 8 more years with this furnace run before we would shut down and do a complete rebuild. And that aligns with the new regs that are being issued. So probably 2030-ish, I think, is when all those regs are supposed to kick in for us. And that'd be about time we do a furnace rebuild. So.
Great. Thanks, Eric, for those details and the timing. Right.
Well, I know that's a lot of information, so I just want to pause and let people think about it a little bit and see if there's more questions or comments. John, as my follow-up to the questions about the new rules, by 2024, they have to, there won't be a change in pollution control technology. They'll just update their current control system. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, working with the current control system that's already in place. So like Rio Bravo has a control system in place now. It's been in place for some time. And so they would work with that current system to make enhancements to it, to make sure you're getting even further emissions reductions to meet those new rule limits, not because there's brand new control technology available, but working with the current system to make it even better to get those additional emissions reductions.
And then there's a future rule that would require a greater change in technology.
For the glass rule, it is set that way.
But for Rio Bravo?
Not for Rio Bravo. So Rio Bravo has the one new emissions limit that goes into effect in 2024. The glass one is the one that has the 2-step process where 2024, there's a lower limit. And then upon the rebuild of the furnace, the latest control technology would have to be installed to get to that lower limit.
Okay, so we're just kind of messing with the toggles to try to make it better.
Yeah, more or less. Working with the current system to make it even more effective. Yes.
Is someone from Rio Bravo here? Do you want to speak up at all? I don't want to put you on the spot, so. Okay. I will say we do know that a lot of biomass facilities, so this is basically a facility that's burning wood and has an older pollution control technology on it. And they're burning the wood for energy. So it's being put, I believe, into the PG&E transmission lines there. There are most all of the biomass facilities in the Pacific Northwest have a different pollution control technology on them called a baghouse that can capture PM 2.5 at a much higher efficiency rate. And that is an option for other facilities to adopt. However, it does not seem like at the moment the district is pushing that facility in that direction. So I did want to state that background. Kim, your hand's raised.
Yeah, so it doesn't make sense to me if that's an option for the district to push on these biomass facilities, then why is it not a requirement? If it could capture all this smoke and chips or whatever is coming out of this facility, then we should be able to implement that. That should be a requirement, not an option. That's why we're here.
Thanks, Kim. Maybe I see Ed has his hand up, but I know that Dustin from our permits team is also on here. Maybe he can describe a bit more about the control technology in place at Rio Bravo. But maybe Ed, if you want to go first.
Sure, thanks. I'm just looking at the page that talks about the emissions inventory over the years, and I'm noting that the PM 2.5 is not even a ton, and that's per year. So I mean, they've made some extreme efforts to reduce the PM 2.5. Little more concerned about NOx from the burn itself. But I do want to make the point that the PM 2.5 is significantly lower over the years.
Can we go back to that? Because I did note that, and thank you, Ed, for bringing it up. And we wanted to know about that because that's just for the year 2020. And I didn't know if that was a result of a contract that ran out and the temporary pausing of the facility, or what that's a result of.
You know, what would be a good question too is, what does 2021 look like, and when would that that information be available for this list?
Ed, thanks for your comment. Our annual emission inventory statements went out, the beginning of this year. So, once Rio Bravo submits their inventory statement to the district, we will process that and, update the inventory as needed.
And then maybe I'll jump in and then see if Dustin or John want to correct me or to Kimberly's earlier comment, just to make sure that we answered her. From my understanding, through the big public process we went through last year to amend the rule amendments are really about lowering the limits, not necessarily dictating the technology. It's up to the facility to see how they can use that technology to meet these limits. John, can you talk a little bit more just globally about like these limits in terms of like their stringency, maybe compared to other rules like this? I guess maybe to Genevieve's point, other states have biomass facilities, and is ours higher or lower limit?
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Jess. Yeah. So whenever we do a rule amendment, we do a comprehensive evaluation of comparing what we're thinking about with our rule limits against other analogous rules, other parts of the state or across the country. Are there new technologies being employed that are new, that maybe we're not aware of, that are being developed, that could be employed here, that could get our emission limits even lower? So we always do a comprehensive review of that to make sure that we are updating our rule with the latest information, that we're getting our limits the lowest that they can feasibly be. And that's what we did in this rule evaluation last year in 2021 when we went through a public process, lots of really great comments from a variety of parties, and we ended up with the limits that we did, and we're confident that it is the most stringent rule for biomass facilities that's out there.
I truly understand what you're saying, but if you're amending rules and if it's gonna make our air quality better, I mean, we have the worst air. Look at the Cal Enviro screen. We have the worst air. So we have to do more than just the basics or the check marks. We really have to do more than that. That's just my opinion. I'm not speaking for the whole committee. I'm just speaking on my behalf. I am an asthmatic. My son is an asthmatic. I grew up with industrial facilities around me within this boundary. So to me, it needs to be more done than what's being done right now.
I want to note that Lilia is thumbs up for your comment, Kim. Nayamin?
So I don't understand, Jessica. You said that you cannot mandate a facility to use this technology versus that technology. But if the standard is that they have to lower their emissions and the current technology is not going to allow them to meet that standard, so then how is the new rule being enforced?
Sorry, I think I misspoke. I'm not saying that we can't. I'm just saying that the rule process we went through lowered the emissions limits. And so they have to find a way to meet those requirements. And in that evaluation, we look at the technologies that can get them there. And if those technologies are feasible to get them there, whether it's the technology they already have installed or a new technology, then we require them to meet that however they can. And so we did lower the limits. And I think John was just reflecting that in this particular case, I'm correct me, John, it sounds like you're saying in this particular case, there's not a new technology, but they have to, whatever they do, whether they decide they have to install something new or tweak whatever, they have to meet those lower limits.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yep, thanks, Jessica. That's right.
And do we have any clarification on how these numbers kind of vary wildly? While NOx stays at 90 to 100 tons, PM 2.5 is kind of wavering. I'm wondering how that's possible, and especially how we can drop to 1 ton in 2020.
So maybe I can jump in here. The NOx VOC and PM emissions are based on obviously the inventory statements that they submit, but also the annual source test results that the facility provides. And it's kind of why the emissions can vary from year to year. Maybe Seth can elaborate a little, add to that a little bit more on this facility.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Hi, I'm Seth Lane, Supervising Air Quality Specialist in Technical Services. We process emissions inventory and do other things as well. So emissions inventory can be a complex situation because there are several factors that come into play. One is the facilities do provide us with their throughputs, their annual throughputs, and for the device we'd be looking at here, it'd be probably related to their combustion, obviously for Rio Bravo. So they would provide us with that annual throughput, and from there, we would use information in the engineering evaluation, other resources to develop emission factors to speciate out emissions based on that. However, for facilities such as this, as Mark mentioned, we also take into account their source tests, and the facility provides those source test results back to us that has the parts per million of each pollutant. And so we review the source tests and make sure that it matches the emission statement provided by the facility. And if we see any discrepancies, that's something we correct or reach out to the facility as part of our review. So basically, there could be different fuel types, different types of fuel that's being combusted. Since it's a biomass facility, it could vary. And the source test results just vary as they take them. And that's what's used to quantify and estimate those annual emissions. So hopefully that helps explain.
Thanks, Seth. I don't want to take up all this time. Maybe Mark, thank you for coming. Oh, Mark, you're not representing Rio Bravo, you're Air District. Okay, never mind. I was going to ask if someone from Rio Bravo was here and could perhaps explain how these discrepancies in 2020 occurred. But if they're not present, I guess we can note that as a follow-up. Does anyone else want to make a comment, have a question?
Yeah, this is Dustin Brown, one of the supervising air quality engineers with the Air District. I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about, this facility. So obviously there's different sources of emissions at this facility. So, they're actually burning the wood fuel in a combustion unit. So that unit, is pretty well controlled. And then it has NOx controls and it has particulate matter controls. But then they also have just the raw material receiving, which, could just be trucks dumping wood chips or ag waste or something outside. So, the different processes, lend themselves to different levels of control. So if some of these just are tipping trucks over on their side or something. So, those are such a big area that it's really hard to try to capture and control those types of sources. Whereas the combustion source is a much easier source to actually, control and route the emissions through controls. So just something to keep in mind when you talk about the different emission units and then the types of controls that can be applied.
Okay, Yeah, because we know PM 2.5 is normally coming from combustion, so it's part of that controlled process.
And they do
Okay.
have an electrostatic precipitator on their combustion unit, which
Mhm.
uses like electric charge to actually have the particulates stick to the plates. And then periodically the plates are like knocked and the particulate falls off and stays out of the exhaust stream.
Okay, I see a question in the chat about an accidental. Did you take into account the accidental wood pile fire?
I'm not sure.
I could answer that if you want, Mark.
Go ahead.
No, we don't take into account like emergency accidental situations or catastrophes for inventory.
Okay, for time's sake, I think we should move on, but I did want to note a general feeling of unease and perhaps the fact that this conversation is not complete. And so we can continue to discuss this because there is some community concern with the high levels of emissions, especially in this community. Does anyone else have comments or questions before we move on? Okay. I apologize, my energy levels are.
All right, no worries. Let me just go ahead and advance this to the next facility, which is Kinder Morgan. This is on the southeast corner of Cedar and Central. This is again in the same area we've been talking about so far this evening. On the right-hand side is a map showing where it's located. So it's closer to Malaga Elementary, but then also just to the right of Orange Center Elementary and preschool. So kind of in between those two different schools. There's a picture down there at the bottom. This is a petroleum product storage and transportation facility. So looking at the emissions from this facility against all the emissions across the entire community, for NOx emissions, it's about 1% of the total across the community. For VOC, it's about 2%. And then for PM 2.5, it is 0%. So the emissions from this facility are relatively small compared to others. Again, looking at the trend here over time for NOx, VOC, and PM 2.5, VOC is the largest of the three pollutants here, of course, because of the operation that it is. And you can see the trend here over time. And then the SERP commitment, IS7, evaluation of BARC requirements. This is the SERP commitment that applied to this facility. And so through the AB 617 BARC evaluation process, a number of VOC leak detection and repair rules are going through a rule amendment process, which some of you may have been following that or attending some of the workshops. We are evaluating rules 4401, 4409, 4455, 4623, and 4624, which are all rules that are related to leak detection and repair requirements for oil and gas operations, and specifically for VOC emissions. And for this facility, the rules 4623 and 4624 would apply, which are related to the storage and transfer of organic liquid. We've been keeping the CSC and other committees updated as we've gone through the public process. We had a workshop last October 7th, and then just last month on March 10th, another workshop, and we'll keep that public process going and keep you updated when we're having other meetings. And these amended rules are planned to be considered by our governing board in the coming months. And looking at the measure IS4, the facility is subject to enhanced inspection frequency due to having an emissions violation within the past 3 years. And just looking at the details of those, in April of 2020, the driver did not connect the vapor hoses prior to loading. June of 2020, a 5,000 ppm leak was found on the west lane. And then August of 2020, the ladder seal had a 1-inch gap. And so because of these violations, they are subject to the more frequent inspection frequency. And I'll stop there again and see if there are any comments or questions about this facility.
That's a lot. Thank you, John. I see Ed's hand is up.
I just wanted to make the comment that if a driver shows up at the rack and doesn't hook up his vapor control, typically the rack will ban him from life from being able to load. So he's essentially lost his job and his ability to run a fuel truck. So just as an inside piece of information, the if you don't operate correctly when you're loading your vehicles, you pay a very high price.
Thanks, Ed. And to clarify, do you represent this facility? Have background info?
No, I'm not Kinder Morgan. I'm Valley Pacific. We do load there, no question about that. So, and I do know what the rules are, and there are stages of penalties for drivers that don't do things right, but not hooking up a vapor hose is a lifetime. You're out of here.
Awesome. We appreciate your expertise.
Thank you.
Does anyone have comments? We see lots of emission violations here. VOC emissions. Maybe we can get into what VOCs are again. Venice?
Yeah, I'm noticing that I'm curious, how are these violations being reported?
Yeah.
And I noticed that similar to the last one, we see violations reported like every 2 months. And so if the enhanced inspection frequency goes from 2 years to 6 months, how is it that we would be monitoring these kinds of violations? How are they being reported? And then is every 6 months really as helpful as more frequency? I marvel at the consistency of every 2 months there's a violation reported, and I'm worried and interested in how that occurs, and then what we're planning to do to really address that in a more intentional way.
Yeah, so Jason, again, with the Air District, I can jump in and address that. So, as I mentioned earlier, with these facilities, we're out there on a periodic basis to do the full facility inspection. On any of these that are on the enhanced inspection frequency, it's every 6 months. But in addition to that, we're also out at these facilities periodically for other reasons, whether it's to observe a source test or if we're investigating a breakdown or something that was called in. And then, a lot of these larger facilities, if they are Title V facilities that have federal permits, they also have a requirement to self-report when they have deviations from permit conditions. So, it's possible that some of these violations, I don't know off the top of my head the specifics for these three, but some of these could be a case where a violation was self-reported by the facility to the district. Like for instance, if a driver doesn't connect the vapor hose and they catch him, like Ed said, they may ban the driver, but they also have to report that to the district as a deviation from their permit condition. And then, the district would take enforcement action if it's not something that, is like a mechanical failure out of their control. There may be other cases too where violations are discovered during an inspection, but they may have occurred, prior during the year, and we find it when we're doing a records review. So the dates may be a little bit more spaced out. It can vary.
Thank you. Are any of these violations automatically triggering some additional follow-up in terms of looking for increased exposures, or is there some checklist that these would be a part of, that if they are violated, there would be some other ways that they should be following up with concerns of safety for the neighborhood? And if so, is the neighborhood or the community notified of such things?
So with all violations that we find, the first step that the district looks for before we start, dealing with penalties is we have to get them back into compliance. So, there would be follow-up inspections that occur after the initial violation is reported to verify that, if there was a leak or an issue, that it's been corrected and, that the leak is not ongoing. That's step one. And then, sorry, could you repeat the rest of your question?
Yeah, I'm wondering if any of these specific violations would trigger an automatic next step for looking for exposure or looking for impact, and if the community would be notified of such a thing. But internally, is there something that any of these would trigger? And then secondarily, is there something the community would be notified of?
I mean, internally, that when there's violations, that gets noted, in the inspection report. And, it's something that we're going to keep an eye out for when we go back to that facility for subsequent inspections, to keep an eye on, make sure it's not a recurring thing, that they are, keeping an eye on that. And as far as, the providing that information to the community, we do provide to the 617 steering committee through our website. We give that annual report every year with all of the violations that are issued, as well as complaints that are filed within the 617 community, and what the outcome of those violations were, or of those complaint investigations.
Yeah, thank you. I really feel compelled to just say that that public health really means that it's somebody's health on the line, and so I do appreciate the responses and the fact that your representatives are here and that you're sharing this information. I guess what I don't feel necessarily is a sense of urgency about the exposures that we are exposing community members to. And I'm thinking, elementary school students and young people and families. And so I understand sort of the business perspective, but I also, because I am a physician, I also just can't help but respond to what I don't feel is sort of an urgency about protecting public health. So I just wanted to share that.
And just, Jason, can you remind me, just not being a compliance person myself, when we find violations, whether it's in real time or in records, the violation itself, although I agree to Dr. Curry's point, isn't always, found out or reported out to the community immediately based on some of the ways that Jason was just describing that violations are found. Perhaps it's in retrospect with records review, but if we find a violation in real time, it has to be remedied, rectified immediately. There's not like ongoing, unless I guess something mechanically is wrong, typically an ongoing violation, because otherwise that would be an ongoing violation that they would have to like get another NOV for. Is that along the right lines?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, and like I mentioned, the first priority for the district is getting the violation, whatever it is, corrected. So if it's something that is, occurring at the time of the investigation, if possible, we have them correct it right then and there. With certain types of violations, if that equipment, we may require them to have it tagged out until it can be repaired, so that they're not continuing to use defective equipment in the meantime. So there are some immediate actions required to prevent ongoing emissions in violation of their permit requirements.
Okay. I thank you so much. I want to summarize some of what Vinny said, because I think it's really important, and hear some more feedback on that. But first, I wanted to clarify, because we glossed over this in the beginning. The emissions we're talking about are VOCs, volatile organic compounds. They're basically chemicals that will volatilize into the atmosphere, and then we can breathe them in. This is a petroleum storage and transportation facility. So it's holding on to petroleum and other fuels, I think like jet fuel. And we know that a lot of the VOCs that come from petroleum are classified as toxic air contaminants. They call them BTECs, which I know it looks like Jessica's hand is raised. But those include benzene and formaldehyde and other toxics that are known carcinogens. So, when we see these emission violations repeatedly, I mean, this is a big facility and they're handling dangerous chemicals. And I want to pass it to Jessica, but I do want to summarize what I heard from Venice, was that the concern for the emission violations and the need for, what would she say, an intentional way to address these violations. So perhaps an even more enhanced inspection frequency for this facility. I also heard outreach to communities when there is a violation. I also heard conducting more of an analysis of public health impacts, especially to the surrounding communities. We do know that there's the Flamingo mobile home community fence line to this facility, and also homes along Central and Cedar and Malaga Ave that are fence line. And Venice, please correct me if that was a poor summary, but I'm hearing that there's perhaps more that needs to be done around violations and analyses and community notification.
Yeah, I would just add a sense of urgency about the fact that it is an important exposure to be prevented. And that in as much as we're talking about notifying people after the fact, I would also want us to be thinking about what can be done to prevent the exposures. And so that was in part the recommendation to increase or decrease the amount of time in between inspections if we're seeing that there are repeated violations that are potential real public health disasters. So I really just want to get a sense that there's an understanding that these are real people who are being exposed to dangerous chemicals in potentially harmful ways that are not going to be mitigated because we let them know 10 months later that, oh yeah, we had an accident over here. And I just don't get a sense of, that there's that kind of urgency about it.
Thanks, Denise. I want to pass it to those with their hands raised, but I also want to remember our what we all agreed to in the beginning, which was to share the space. And we haven't heard from a lot of residents on the line. So before we pass to those with hands up, does anyone have any kind of closing comments today? Lilia, I see your video is on. Let's see. Guadalupe is on, Isabel's on. If anyone wants to speak before the close of this meeting, because we are reaching that agenda end. Or Kim.
¿Yo quiero hablar? Sí, buenas tardes a todos.
Yes.
Sí. Es nada más no dejar de la última prioridad. Sabemos que los vientos están muy fuertes. Yo no estoy enferma de ningún tipo de enfermedad y estos días he estado con pura estornadera, de como que siento que es gripa y no es gripa, sino es alergia. Entonces hay que darle prioridad a la prioridad primero que nada para que no nos enfermemos más. Sabemos que ahorita las personas que tienen problemas respiratorios están pasando por la situación difícil. Ahora que nosotros no padecemos nada, nos está afectando también. Entonces tratar de darle la prioridad a lo que es la prioridad, principalmente en la salud de la comunidad. Pienso que eso para mí es importante.
Thanks, Lilia. Okay, I see Jessica and then Bill.
Thank you, Genevieve. I want to uplift and just kind of add it to some of Dr. Curry's comments and what Genevieve was mentioning in Lilia's comments. A couple of things that we know we can already do and we're already doing really with the support from you all is monitoring very close to, and you saw on that map, John, actually, can you go back to the map of the Kinder Morgan location compared to Malaga Elementary? We have that trailer that is real-time reporting BTEX. So those volatile toxic compounds that Genevieve mentioned, we are reporting and tracking in real time. We did not launch that trailer prior to those 3 emissions violations, so we don't have those exact dates. But anytime we see, and as we report kind of regularly, our annual understanding, or even quarterly or weekly, as you've seen in some of our weekly reports, understanding of the data that we're collecting at Malaga, we will 100%, it is a big alert if for some reason BTEX spikes, especially at Malaga. So that will let us know if there is an exposure. I think to slightly, I know it doesn't completely address Dr. Curry's point, but to address at least our understanding of impacts in a nearby sensitive receptor to the primary type of pollution that is coming from that type of facility. I'll also just add to Dr. Curry's other point about prevention, right? Like, right, as a doctor, I'm assuming, and I hear it from my doctor all the time, prevention is really the best medicine. Obviously, treating the symptom is our goal here at the district if we do find a violation. But one of the things we also do with our inspections is educate the facility on how not to have an emissions violation in the future. And that is such an important piece. I'm not going to say we can take 100% credit for that prevention, but you can see that those are the 3 most recent violations. We've had inspections since those violations and have not issued emissions violations to that facility. So I think there is something to be said there, although we're always going to continue to work on that. So I just wanted to rest assured that that's a big piece of our job here at the district, is to educate, we always talk about outreach to the communities, but outreach to facilities, like to be good stewards of their community. And that's a large part of our enforcement program. So thanks, Genevieve, and thanks to everyone who's commented.
I see Bill and then Ivanka and then Mark.
Yes, as I'm familiar with the facility, and I just want to, if it'll ease your minds, any Kinder Morgan has no problem closing down a rack or for any reason whatsoever, which causes delays and so forth, which to deal with it all the time. So I can attest to you the problem at all about just shutting down a rack and causing you to wait hours to load until whatever problem is corrected. That's not a problem for them. They could care less whether you got to wait
Bill,
4 hours or whatever the time is. They don't hesitate at all to stop. Yes. Was there a question?
yes, it's hard to hear you.
Did you hear what I said?
Not really. No, it was unless someone else can make it out.
I generally heard that if there is an issue, that the terminal is willing to stop operations until the issue is fixed and delay transport in order to fix a problem with what you're calling a rack, which I don't know exactly what a rack is.
Well, in other words, there's like 7 or 8 loading racks over there, and that's what they do. They load trucks, and if there's any issue at all, they don't hesitate to close that rack down. And you may be waiting in line for 2 or 3 or 4 hours until they get the rack back up or until the lines are diminished. But they don't really have any problem whatsoever about taking care of situations as they arise versus, trying to put it off to fix it at another time when maybe it's more convenient. So I'm just saying that in case it helps you to feel safer about what goes on there. They've been there, 50 years, and I don't know of any major accident that they've had over that time period. And the other thing to remember, it saves, what they do is the product is piped to that point. So it saves virtually thousands of loads that's usually transported by truck by using their facility. That facility handles the majority of the gas stations in the valley. Otherwise, that product would have to be trucked out of the Bay Area or Los Angeles. So that's I don't know how familiar you are with that operation, but that's, in general terms, that's what they do. And they're very conscientious about taking care of any problems and avoiding problems because they have to. That's just that's their business.
Got it. Thanks, Bill. Thanks for that context and that background. It's helpful for understanding. Ivanka, your hand's been raised.
Okay, there you are. Sorry I couldn't join online tonight, internet problems. This is more, I think, just a question, and I think, Bill, you kind of just touched on it, referring to what the company or the business, the protocols are, the safety protocols as far as shutting down a track. Before you had stated that, and I was waiting to make a comment, my question is around protocol safety and the notification process that Dr. Curry is talking about is not quick enough and it's not responsive enough. And so the question and idea combination is, what is that safety notification protocol to the surrounding communities that are in place? That's great that you can shut down a track or whatever those safety protocols are that you would know specifically as part of the industry. But when that goes awry, or when that protocol of what the safety mechanisms are still cannot shut down enough, and you know that something of a chemical or a VOC is already getting out, what is the notification system to the community? And if that is not in place, then I think when Dr. Curry is talking about what is that next avenue for enforcement, because right now it doesn't appear that it's enough if these types of violations are continuing to occur, then at what point, and does it have to be a part of the air district's changing of the enforcement rules, or can it be something that the air district says, you know what, you've had this many violations, we are now going to make sure that you are notifying the public, not just the record of when we've had the violations. I mean the physical siren, the use of modern technology to make sure that community members get some kind of buzz. If we're signed up to the air district, that something comes through that same type of connection to the air district's app, that this is going on, just like we're already doing this for our PM 2.5. I think when we're having this conversation right now, it's not necessarily because we already know we don't have the trust in the businesses to be doing what they need to do to protect the community. So if there's violations occurring, is this something that another rule has to be made? Because we know that in our space of the SERPs, we have the right as a committee to be a part of what those adjustments are. So that's great that rules are being updated, but are they being updated with actual actions that improve the enforcement, that it actually makes a better impact on the community? So we know from all of our 617 communities that we've been wanting to see notification for pesticides. We know that we want to see notification when pesticides are even in this South Central CERT plan, right? So why can't this be a space where we discuss what is a notification system that alerts the community when something emergency is actually happening? Because this isn't just a one-time event. We know that our city of Fresno wants all of this area to be industrial, and we continue to see these increased amount of industrial fires. At some point, these fires might start with some wood, some pellet, or some plastic containers, but will get out of control, and you got these volatile type of inflammable gases. So what is that notification system? I mean, we know that our country's done notification systems back to the 50s with those funny little triangle yellow signs, right? So we're so far advanced from that. How difficult would it be to establish something along those lines of notification? Not, you know, to me, when we're talking about what will be intentional, it has to intentionally, in a very positive way, impact the community where they can try to protect themselves, because we're already seeing that community is at a deficit when we're trying to protect ourselves from these industrial fires. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ivanka. I'm hearing a lot about this facility when it comes to community notification, increased enhanced inspections, and a few other things. And I mean, one second. So I feel like a lot of these issues are unresolved, and we do keep saying that the SERP is a living document. And so I'm thinking once we get through these facilities, I think it's probably going to take one more meeting to get through them. We have a follow-up meeting where we discuss kind of our takeaways from this and what we think should change in the rules and regulations regarding stationary sources, and discuss that as a CSC, kind of as our, okay, now we learned all this information, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to change our SERP to address these issues? And that's a suggestion.
I had one small suggestion on top of that, like super, like 5 seconds, is just, I would also want to make sure maybe we can, in that updated presentation, bring more context and information back about the violations that we discussed, because I think that can help provide context to Ivanka's point about the severity, or you know, I'm even seeing and hearing from the industry folks about kind of what types of violations those are. I know we threw a lot of technical terms out, and maybe bringing it down to earth about what those violations really mean.
Okay. Nyameen, and then Ivanka, if your hand is still raised.
Yes, so I mean, I have been saying that we have all these monitors that I think that they should be used them in a more efficient way. So for example, I'm very concerned because if we are talking about how close the mobile home park is from this facility, it's closer than even other facilities are to homes. And these are mobile homes that do not have a good weatherization or air filtration inside the houses. So I think we need to move the trailer, or have the van that goes around. I mean, we should be taking, you know, grab samples of what are the VOCs and speciation, like how much benzene and, you know, VTEX from the VTEX family are these families breathing. So I encourage that we consider that as part of the adjustments to our monitoring plan.
Yeah, thanks, Naomi. And just to comment on that, we definitely have capabilities. We have different canisters we could use to take grab samples of the air. We have a laboratory setup who can analyze that for different VOCs. So there are definitely some things we could do to take some measurements in the area. Yeah, good idea.
Awesome. Let's maybe talk about that either at the next air monitoring meeting and our follow-up meeting to the stationary source meeting. And wouldn't it be cool if we could also do some of that monitoring with you and learn, and maybe even bring youth from the community to learn about how that happens. Okay, it is 7:28. I think this is perhaps a good time to put a bookmark in the conversation. We still have more facilities to get through, so maybe that's our 3rd edition, and then maybe even the 4th edition where we talk about what we're going to do with all this information, and how we may amend our SERP. How does everyone feel about that? Are we good to pass it back to Jem to finish off the agenda? I see a head nod. Okay. Oh, it
Thank you
got dark
all.
where I am.
Oh yeah, you just kind of faded out. Below it. Thank you all for such an engaging and productive conversation. It's clear there needs to be more conversation around this, as Genevieve said, to be continued. And there will be more opportunity to continue this. In the meantime, we do hope that these discussions so far will lead to appropriate actions to address these concerns. And to be mindful of your time, we're going to make a rough transition to a time-sensitive standing update from the truck reroute subcommittee. And then all other updates will be sent through email this week so that we had enough time for tonight's conversation. I'm going to pass it off to Jess. Oh, Lily, I see your hand is up. Do you have a question?
No, no es pregunta, nada más es un agradecimiento a Ed y a Marisela porque nos donaron la traila a Familias en Acción. Antes de irnos y dejar las buenas noches, quería agradecerle a Ed y a Marisela. Dios les pague la ayuda que nos dieron a nosotros, a la organización sin fines de lucros, Familias en Acción. Muchas gracias.
Lilia, our pay is that you're making a difference in the community, and we're so very thankful for that. Thank you.
All right, Jess, I'll pass it off to you. Thank you, Lilia. Thank you, Ed.
All right. Well, my pass was going to be actually to Scott. If there was an update on truck reroute, I know that we're talking about timing and taking it to the city council. Every other update, as Jem mentioned, will be in email to you all, but I'll pass it to Scott.
Good evening, everyone. Good to see you all. Please go ahead and mark your calendars for April 28th if you're interested in that item. We plan to have the agreement for the truck reroute study on the April 28th council agenda. That said, we are not 100% there just with some of the language. No major concerns, but typically on interagency agreements goes back and forth with the respective attorneys for the agencies a bit. So we are very close with the UC Merced language. And again, we hope to have that approved on April 28th. If there are any changes, I'll definitely communicate that to Jess so that can get out to the full steering committee. But assuming that we have a green light and our city council approves it, then we'd be able to move forward with the actual truck reroute study and the associated health study. And I'm available to answer any questions.
We will send that date in email. I know it's been a long meeting with a lot of information, and writing down one more thing might be a lot. That date, along with other updates, will be in the email. And as Scott said, any other information. So thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I don't see any comments or questions in the chat, so we'll keep it moving. I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Liz to walk us through tonight's action items. Again, this is an opportunity for the committee to review, correct or update or add any action items. Liz, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for hanging in there until the end. I know it's been a long night. So I think we have 9 action items for tonight. And as Jem said, these are definitely open for discussion. So as we go through them, definitely feel free to comment with any changes or additions. So first is the Air District will collect information regarding the dairy operation and the Mid-Valley disposal facilities to include in the stationary source discussion. Next is to develop a working definition for operationalizing cumulative impacts. Next is to provide a breakdown of the Cal EnviroScreen indicators. Next is the Air District will check with their team about setting up air monitors at Vitro over the next few windy days. Next is the Air District will conduct a deeper analysis to compare the samples from vitro violation days compared to non-violation days. Next is to develop a system to better inform parents of children who are exposed to the pollution from vitro about those violation days. Next is the present representative from vitro will relay the concerns of the CSC regarding exposed glass piles and dust to their supervisors. Next is the Air District will be updating its emissions inventory map to include comparison within stationary sources and between all sources. And last is the Air District will prepare a follow-up discussion on the discussed rules and regulations for stationary sources for an upcoming CSC meeting. Are there any changes or additions from anybody?
You know, this is Ed. I just wonder if some of these facilities might be interested in providing a tour for the CSC members to see what the level of effort is, what the level of equipment is to reduce emissions. Might be helpful for us to understand more about what they're doing along the way, just as a thought.
Yeah, is this something maybe the Air District could coordinate, or who should we?
Can definitely do that initial outreach, I think, to those facilities and then go from there. I think that could be an action item is to do and see what interest there and availability there is. Sure.
Right. And my point is, a place like Kinder Morgan, I know they self-test very regularly because they can't afford to have the kind of, well, in 36 months, they had the three violations. They can't afford those because they're very, very expensive from an enforcement standpoint. So it might be interesting to learn about how each one of these companies actually operates. And we've had some good input to Vitro Glass and some of the others. So I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, that's a really great suggestion. I will continue writing that as I pass it off to Jem to finish up the meeting.
Thank you, Liz, and thanks, Ed. If there are any other questions or action items you'd like to add, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Or if it happens after tonight, you can always email the Air District and we'll be sure to add it to the tracker. So I will move on to wrapping up the meeting. Next meeting will be, let me share my slide really quick. Next meeting will happen, the upcoming agenda setting meeting will be next Wednesday, April 20th at 4:30 p.m. And then the following CSC meeting will be Wednesday, May 11th. We're back to the second Wednesday, May 11th at 5:30 p.m. And then in terms of agenda, we know we like to leave a few minutes at the end for anyone to propose any agenda items. We already have for May is going to be the continued budget discussion and timeline. And Naimeen will be our co-host for that evening. And then we have another just standing suggested topic for area sources. But if there are any other suggested agenda items, this is an opportunity to share that. Otherwise, you can come to the agenda setting meeting and propose items there as well. So we're just going to give a moment in case anyone has any agenda items they'd like to propose tonight.
I think this was already captured, but continuing this conversation.
Absolutely. Okay. And I guess just a few announcements. So on behalf of the Air District and Hardin Company, we'd like to thank everyone for submitting, our CSC members specifically, for submitting the stipend program, the direct deposit and W-9 forms. We really appreciate you taking the time to do that. If you haven't submitted it yet, or if you have any questions, please reach out to myself, my team, or the Air District, and we'd be happy to troubleshoot. And before we open it up to public comments and for closing remarks, would anyone from the committee like to use this time to make any announcements to share with your colleagues? This can include any exciting events, any or any news you'd like to share the space tonight. Lily, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
Sí, la estoy levantando. Estoy mirando que alguien dijo de los, si alguien tiene volantes para las cortadoras de césped. Yo me pongo como voluntaria. Estamos haciendo distribución de alimentos cada semana aquí en la área. Entonces, que cada distribución, en cada caja de comida o de alimento le ponemos un flyer o algún volante informativo para que sepan de este programa y sería para poder promocionarlo ahí mismo. Entonces, si tienen volantes, por favor, déjenme saber. Si tienen en uno o dos, yo hago las copias, como sea. La idea es tener la información y que la gente se quede con información completa para que puedan cambiar esas máquinas de césped de motor por una de batería. ¿Ok?
Yes, we can send you as many. You don't even have to make copies. We will send you as many as you need.
Awesome. There's a question, what is the date for the lawnmower event?
Hi, we are working very hard on formalizing that date. Right now, we are headed towards a not March, we're in, that's fast, May 14th. We're waiting on the very final paperwork sign off, and we hope to have that communicated to you all within the next week.
Thank you, Jamie. Lily, I see your hand is up again.
Sí, nuevamente la levanté, perdón. Es que estoy que nos acaban de aprobar los siguientes árboles. Vamos a seguir plantando árboles aquí en la escuela Winchell, si Dios lo permite, para el próximo sábado. Y en este medio quiero agradecer a Nayamina, su organización, porque nos ha apoyado bastante. Entonces, ya tenemos otro proyecto en mano y embelleciendo nuestras comunidades y plantando más árboles. Ojalá y las personas que se encargan de cortar esos árboles vengan y quiten esos troncos, por favor, que estamos tratando de que se vea bonito, pero con esos troncos que nomás vienen y cortaron el árbol y dejaron el tronco ahí, no luce nada. Así es que, por favor, hay que hacer el trabajo completo para que todo sea más bonito y se embellezcan nuestras comunidades también con eso.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that news, Lilia. Would anyone else like to make announcements to the committee before we open it up? Okay, I want to thank you, Genevieve, for amazing facilitation tonight. Really appreciate it and looking forward to more with you. I'll pass it off to Jess and our co-hosts to closing remarks, and then we'll open it up to public comments.
I just want to, I'll just echo the thanks. I can't be more grateful. There was so much engagement from so many people, and I feel so grateful that we got through as much as we did. We kind of knew that we might not get through it all, but I can't wait for the next round of conversation. And I can't thank Genevieve enough for not only being great in preparation, but a great facilitator during the meeting. So thanks, Genevieve.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome, thanks. All right, then we'll open it up for public comments, and we'll check on YouTube Live if there are any comments there. Laura, I see your hand is up. Go ahead. Laura, are you there?
Hello, this is Laura Rosenberger Hyder here. Well, I heard in the Rio Bravo, when I reported a high reading was like about 200 AQI or something, was really high. I think it was even higher than, I don't remember exactly what it was, but the Air Pollution Control District, I think, called me back when I reported it and said that the wood pile accidentally went on fire. Because someone was rushing in there quickly, because I had my air monitor outside on the sidewalk there, right next to the driveway of Rio Bravo, and the wind was coming toward me. And someone rushed in like it was an emergency or something. And then the next day I heard like that the wood pile accidentally went on fire. And that was the reason why I got such a high reading on my purple air monitor. And sometimes it happens. That's what I heard. When the wind's blowing the wrong direction that doesn't usually blow in, or I don't know how often, maybe it's just a rare occasion. I don't know how many times it happened. Because it was blowing from east to west at that time.
Does anyone on staff recall this incident and responding to it?
Yeah, so there was a fire out at Rio Bravo some time back, in their yard where they received their wood chips. Normally they do a good job of keeping those chips moved around and piled in such a way that they're not going to get too hot. I think there was an upset at the plant that led to an excess of material sitting out there for a longer period of time than usual, and that led to a spontaneous combustion.
Is that considered
fire.
a violation?
It's not generally considered a violation as long as they are taking steps to put it out as rapidly as possible, because it's not an intentional fire that was set by them. It's not something that they want to be happening any more than we want it to be happening. So it's kind of like when there's a house fire. It's not something we typically write a ticket for. We just work with them to make sure that they're doing everything they can to get it put out as quickly as possible.
Okay, so it sounds like maybe there could be a rule on management of wood chips, but this is the end of the meeting, so I don't think we'll. But I don't know how to pronounce your name. Tonali, perhaps? I've seen your hand go up multiple times, and I apologize. This is the first time we've gotten to you.
Sí, muy buenas tardes. Este es el nombre de mi hijo. Mi nombre es Guadalupe Beltrán. Mi hijo está en la escuela Edison. Y gracias a algunas juntas que hemos tenido con la Red de Justicia Ambiental, hemos aprendido que hay un monitor en la escuela Edison. El problema es que nunca nos han dado avisos de que pasa algo, de la calidad del aire, siendo que sí ha pasado eso. Es una zona muy contaminada y ni a los padres ni a mi hijo le han dado estas notificaciones, y nosotros sabemos la importancia del monitor, pero desafortunadamente no hay ningún resultado, no nos han avisado. Y no sabemos cómo está la calidad del aire, no sabemos si nuestros hijos pueden estar ahí haciendo deporte o estando al aire libre, y lo que queremos saber es cómo podemos hacer, qué es lo que podemos estar en esa información, cómo nos pueden dar esa información, ya que ni a los papás ni a los estudiantes, y yo creo que tampoco a la gente que trabaja en la escuela le han avisado sobre esto, sobre lo importante de esta información, y lo que queremos saber es qué es lo que pueden hacer, cómo nos van a informar para que nosotros sigamos protegiendo la salud de nuestros hijos.
Sorry, I don't know. Maybe I'll just jump in. I know we're kind of at the end of the meeting. We did have, and Jamie or others even know, do we have an upcoming outreach subcommittee specifically about air monitoring? Because I know that committee touched a lot on the concerns that you bring up, and there were some actions and some follow-up and even like a very specific plan. And I just don't know if we had another date for that, Jamie.
I don't have the date in front of me. I will tell you that we've done some significant outreach already. We did some peach jar, and actually we got a crazy response from the peach jar messaging we did. We had nearly 50 folks calling us, emailing us, asking us for more information. How do they get online? How do they check the monitors? That type of thing. We are having ongoing communication with all of the schools that have monitors on them, specifically to make sure that all of their teachers, staff, administrators and others are aware. We are looking at doing some type of text message service. I know not everyone gets the Peachtree email or Peach Jar emails, and reads through those emails. And then we're ensuring that the schools are running basically the guidelines that go with the different air quality levels, so that they're looking at the monitors. They're looking at the monitors that are on their facilities, if they have monitors on their facilities, and then judging whether or not to keep kids in or let the kids go out. And we've been having lots of conversations. We've been doing lots of outreach about it. We've even had a few schools who put flyers in take-home packets for kids. We will continue to do that. I don't remember when the next meeting date is, but we'll be sure to email that out to everybody.
Thank you, Jamie.
Así les agradecería mucho que hicieran ese tipo, porque realmente a mí no me ha llegado nada, ni a mi hijo, y conozco otros padres de familia que tampoco. Entonces, probablemente la solución es dar más alcance a la gente, no nada más a un grupo de personas. Y que hubiera como otro tipo de también, no nada más correos electrónicos, sino también mensajes de texto, que sería más fácil para todas las demás padres de familia. Gracias.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Guadalupe. I do want to lift up a related comment in the chat for those who aren't seeing it. So Dr. Curry did ask about an update on monitoring at Edison High about the elevated PM2.5 readings. And the Air District did respond that they are currently conducting the PM2.5 speciation monitoring at Edison, and they'll update the CSC as soon as they get results, which they expect will come in early this summer. I'm not sure if John or Dr. Curry, you want to add any more to that, or if there are any comments or questions regarding that?
No, thanks, Jim. Thanks for bringing that up and summarizing that. That sounds good.
And special thanks to Guadalupe for hanging on for the whole meeting. Really appreciate you joining. Yeah, and hoping we can improve the outreach to the schools, and not just using emails, but maybe even take home flyers. That's what we did back when I was a kid. Okay.
Yeah, and we did do some of those. That's why I said we actually put flyers in with take home packets with kids recently. I think we did it at 3 schools, and we have plans to do it at more schools.
Awesome. Okay, can we call it a day?
Yeah, unless there are any other comments or questions. All right, we'll let you get to your evening. Thank you all for hanging in there. Thank you for the wonderful engagement. Again, Genevieve, thank you for an amazing job tonight.
Thank you. Good night.
Have a good night, everyone. Take care.
If you want any air monitoring done, just call me at 814-590-5528.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Laura.
Thank you, Laura. Have a good night, all.